Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this GM workshop. I am here with Keith Kappel. He is a writer that's worked on several FFG products in the past. A full link I have linked in the GM workshop channel. Hello, how are you?
I'm wonderful, man. Thanks for doing all the work to set this up and promote it and get people to show up and everything. I see my buddy Ryan Brooks, who has also written several Star Wars RPG books for FFG himself, has joined us in the chat, which is wonderful to see. And a couple other friends as well. So yeah, it's great to be here. It's great to be doing something like this again after what feels like forever, because the pandemic kind of slowed everything down. But I'm excited.
So let's get the ball rolling with a few basic questions. You mentioned previously that you were stacking boxes in a comic shop when you were about 12 years old. So how long have you been writing RPGs for? Like, when did you get into that kind of business?
Sure. So, there's a very long version of this story, but I'll try to skip to the important bits. But basically, when I was a teenager, I had played Robotech and Rifts from Palladium. And that I'm still in this business in any capacity, with that being my first exposure to tabletop RPGs, is a testament to just how badly I enjoy this stuff, because those games were not written particularly well. But they had amazing art and really cool settings. So I got into RPGs then. And then, I worked in the comic book stops. I got really into Star Wars. And my buddy Ryan Brooks, who also went on to write for FFG, me and him started a fan site called Fandom Comics in like 2005, I want to say, when episode 3 was just about to come out, is when we launched. And we did fan comic books, and we also did a D20 Star Wars fan source book, a Clone Wars fan source book. I want to say there were like 500 pages of content between me and him that we just did as fans. We statted up like, I don't know, hundreds of Jedi that were from comic books and obscure EU references and stuff like that, and had artist buddies add artwork and stuff like that, and it was a lot of fun. And because we were doing that, we were going to like Star Wars Celebration and stuff like that. And while at one of the celebrations, I met Sterling Hershey, who's been working on iterations of the Star Wars RPG for years and years and years, and developed sort of a friendship with him. And at the time, I was also going to college for creative writing at Columbia College, Chicago. And Sterling knew this. We kept like showing up to the same panels because we all wanted to see the writers give their panels. So we just kept bumping into each other. And I think the very next celebration, I was ready to graduate school. And Sterling let me know, like, hey, the license is moving. Well, we knew it was gone from WotC, but we didn't exactly know where it was going yet. And he was like, it's going to go to this company, FFG, and they just posted an open call for writers. And you and Ryan, you guys should put in for that. You should, apply and see if you get it. So we did, and me and Ryan worked on our submissions for a long, long time, traded them back and forth maybe 100 times. I did a Rancor monster, and I think he did an Accolade beast from episode 2. And so we had to do them in a rule set we'd never played before, so there was like a big learning curve. And I think I looked back recently, my submission still had like typos in it even. But we handed those in and then heard nothing for like a year and change. The game had come out, or had, like, I think the beta came out. And I thought like, oh, well, we didn't get it, but we tried. That was cool of Sterling to hook us up. And then, I think it was just over a year and 3 months, something like that, I finally got an email from Sam Stewart saying like, hey, I know it's been a while, but did you still want to write Star Wars? And I was like, well, yeah, that sounds awesome. So that was the Sons of Fortune job, the Corellian source book. So that was my first one. And, after that, I just kept getting work after a while. And then Ryan actually came in on the Hut book, and then we got to work on a couple books together. The Friends Like These adventure was just me and him, so that was really good. But yeah, so I've been doing this for like 7-8 years since.
Nice. And how much sort of outside input is put into each of these books, do they look over pretty much everything you're writing into them, or is it just they lock you in a room and say, don't come out until you have all the content we want?
Right. So, well, I'm in Chicago, and they're in, or they were, FFG is Roseville, Minnesota, which is quite a ways away, a couple states over. But so they're not locking me anywhere. I'm definitely free at home. I could leave the house if I want to. I usually don't. But the way the process usually goes is they'll ask me if I want to work on the job, and I'll say, of course. Then they'll tell me how much they want to pay, and I'll get sad for a little bit, but then I'll still do it. And they'll give me sort of this briefing of what's expected of me. Like, it's going to be like, you're going to write 20,000 words, and they actually lay out the book in a sense before they even give me the job. So I'll get this big spreadsheet that sort of has every page listed in an Excel spreadsheet, and it'll have like not even a sentence. It'll have like 3 words about what's on that page, and you'll sort of see the chapters and like the general concept and layout of the book. And I'll get to see which pages they want me to do and how many words that's expected to be. And then my job is to create an outline, usually within like a couple weeks or sometimes a week and a half, something like that. Sometimes very little time if it's a rush job. So I'll create my outline, and I will get a ton of feedback on that. Like, oh no, you have to make sure you talk about this, or no, don't talk about that. That doesn't work. And for Star Wars anyway, those outlines do go to the Lucasfilm story team and get approval there, although the speed of that is much slower than the speed we usually work. So sometimes I won't get their outline notes until I've written quite a bit already. But they see the outlines. I know they see the final drafts as well. Whether they see the middle drafts, I don't know. But yeah, so I'll do my outline. Once I get some approval from Sam on that, I can get to work. And then usually I get like 6 to 10 weeks to do a job. And the jobs can range from 10,000 words to 50,000 words. We writers all work in word count. We don't really work in pages, but it's about like 600 to 700 words a page when it ends up printed. In MS Word, it's like 500 words a page, just to give you a sense if you want to convert that. But most professionals, we all work in word count because we get paid by the word. We get paid, 3 cents a word, 5 cents a word, 7, whatever it is. So yeah, I'll go about writing the job. Somewhere in the middle, there'll be a mid-draft turn-in so that Sam or whoever the lead dev is on the book can make sure I've been working, right? And tell me if it's any good or not, or if things drastically have to change or whatever. And once I get that feedback, I'll go and I'll finish my job and hand it in. And once I do that, I don't see it again until it's in print when everyone else sees it with the art and everything. And sometimes changes will get made. Sometimes it's changes by the oh my goodness, outside. But sometimes it's changes from the Star Wars people. Sometimes it's editorial stuff to make my words fit on the page better based on what art they have or whatever. And sometimes it'll be mechanical changes that come from our excellent playtester, Sam himself, or whoever's running the book. Those guys are good at being able to eyeball stuff, which is how we write most of it. But yeah, there'll be a lot of changes. I just won't have input into them at all. And they're for myriad reasons. They're not all just because this is broken or we didn't like what you wrote. Sometimes it's just the physicality, the mechanics of getting words laid out on the page. That often has a lot more to do with it than anything else. But yeah, so I never feel like it. And I will say, when I get the books at the end and I look through it, there's always like 3 or 4 things that I put in my final draft that I'm like, this is never going to go through. And it ends up in print like almost every time, which always shocks me, because I figure like I'm going to put this in there for him to cut so that he keeps all this other stuff I really care about. And the thing I put in there for him to cut inevitably ends up on the page. So that's always fun and exciting and maybe a little terrifying.
Are there any specific examples of that you can think of?
Oh, sure. So things that made it that I didn't expect to make it. The phalanx rules in the Rise of the Separatists book.
Really?
I was convinced they would never make it into the book. Well, it was an idea I had. I don't remember if I had it even at the outline phase. I think I just sort of wrote it. And on that book, I was way over budget on my word count. I had to write all those factions and Rise of the Separatists in a very small amount of pages. They were like, yeah, take 600 words and write about the Galactic Senate in 600 words. Oh, also do a Padme, like iconic character stat block and write-up and everything, too. And those stat blocks and character write-ups for the epic characters can take 500 words all by themselves. So I didn't have a lot of word count to do what I needed to do. So that ended up requiring some like discussion to get on the same page of what I could fit and what they wanted. So for me to add something like phalanx rules that doesn't really even belong in the faction section at all, and that I wasn't asked to create at all, for me to just sort of shoehorn them in at the end, it was like, hey, Tim, maybe you can, Tim Cox ran that book. Like, Tim, maybe you could find room for these somewhere. I feel like they're thematic and they're a fun way to change up how we interact with the minion rules, but they don't belong in my section, and I don't know where they belong. But it's small. Maybe you'll find room for it. You know, I'm glad he did. But yeah, I feel bad in a way because that took away from some other writers' section where, you know, they had words that should have gone in that spot. But that's how it goes sometimes. So that was when I was surprised got in. I was surprised. I did it twice actually, and they both got in. And once in Nexus of Power, and once in Force and Destiny Core Rulebook, where I talk about Revan and Ulic Keldroma as sort of epic poetry and mythology, and sort of recontextualize some of that Legends material and how it fits. Or how the people of the Rebellion era sort of see those stories. And I was surprised that actually made it through LFL and everything, because it felt too big for like me and my house in Chicago to be making those sort of choices. But that ended up on the page. There's just a lot of stuff like that I'm surprised they let me make a choice on, because I feel like this is a choice that should be made in some very big important room with like Pablo, Hidalgo, and Leland Chi, and all these Star Wars bigwigs sort of hashing it out and making a choice. But you know, they let it go to print. So yeah, I'm surprised all the time.
Yeah, I totally get that feeling like you took up space from somebody else. I can see why that would be kind of unusual to see it appear in a book when you put it there literally so it would take up the space of something else getting scrapped.
Right. Yeah. It's a weird situation, and it's just I felt so strongly about the idea, and it was only like it's half a page or something like that. That it was like a lightning bolt. I understood how those rules were going to work like in one instant. I just had the full idea, which is rare. I don't usually work like that, but I felt strongly that I had to write it down, and it was so short I kind of didn't care. If it was a longer idea, I wouldn't do that because I know it would never make it to print. And if it did, I should get paid for it. I shouldn't be giving away, 5 pages of content for free to the publisher. They can afford it. So, yeah, but for something like that, there's lots of stuff. Other stuff that worked kind of like the phalanx rules that sort of snuck in there because I had an idea late in the game. The alternate force traditions kind of worked that way in the mentors section. That was sort of my evil backdoor plan to get the Gan Finesmen, who are like a favorite, and some of these other alternate force traditions sort of addressed in the Force and Destiny line because they kind of weren't. So that was like a last second idea. The homestead rules and the colonist book, those were a very last second idea. A few other ones too. Those are the 2 big ones that come off the top of my head though. But usually when I'm on a book, there'll be a few moments where I think about like what's not in this book already, but that would be the one thing that as a fan I would most want to get out of this book, or that would most make me want to buy this book. And if I don't see it on the list and I could think of a way to do it in like a page or half a page, like sometimes I'll just do it and beg Sam or whoever is running the book to squeeze it in there.
Yeah, it's good that these rules did end up making the cut, because I know a lot of people that swear by the phalanx rules in particular. They've tried them in their campaigns and they've said, oh, these are incredible. I've managed to do like really exciting scenarios with like hundreds of bad guys and whatever. And it's just been so cinematic and cool.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that. It's funny because when you're writing these things, like I'm sitting in my little home office in my apartment in Chicago, and I'm very, by myself in my shorts doing my thing. And you kind of forget that like these books go out at a certain point and a bunch of people read them and then play them. And a lot of that feedback directly from the fans a lot less of it makes its way to the writers than you think. And that's really like across the board. I have other writer friends that write books and stuff like that sell well and do well, but they're starved for feedback from fans. So leave a nice review for a writer today. That's my little PSA.
It must be really good seeing like a community like this where people talk about and praise the game consistently. Sometimes criticize, but comes from a place of enjoyment. Just to see people talking about that every day, and knowing that it's something that you've written and these people are taking that and making something so great out of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a 24/7 ego stroke. If I'm ever feeling down, there's definitely a few Discord servers or like social media groups where I can hop in and get lifted up pretty quickly. So that's definitely super nice to live in the modern world as a writer versus what writers must have felt like in similar situations 100 years ago or whatever, when you were relying on fan mail. I remember when me and Ryan were doing the fandom comic stuff, and we'd put out a Clone Wars like supplement every month, or we went for every month, and maybe 7 came out a year, whatever the case was. But we'd release these things, and we'd see like 500 downloads on the website or something like that, which felt good. But we'd receive zero, like absolute zero feedback. It was just a black void of no one saying anything to us about it. So we never really knew how those were being received, if people liked it. I'm sure podcast hosts deal with a lot of this stuff too, where it's like, I'm putting this out there. People are apparently downloading it. I have no idea if anybody's listening or cares, though. I think it's tough when you create stuff and it's meant to be consumed by an audience and you're not getting anything back from the audience directly. Like it becomes hard to gauge how you're doing.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so stuff like this is great, where I can come in and have an immediate sort of discussion or connection with the people using the stuff I work on. That's super satisfying.
Speaking of the people, I think the ball has been sufficiently rolled. So we'll hand over some questions to this very patient audience that has been listening to me ramble on, and you provide some very interesting answers to the questions that I've asked. So right away, I see in the GM Workshop channel, Philbert66 asks, do you do any playtesting yourself on the rules or stats that you write up, or was that only FFG's playtesters' responsibilities?
Sure. So the short answer to this question is no, I do not. There is no time. There's when you have 6 to 8 weeks to write 20 to 50,000 words and write it as well as you can, because once you hand it in, you never get it back. I'd almost my work would almost always benefit more from another revision pass with my own eyes than it would from putting it on a table in front of people. Almost always, which isn't to say that I don't have mechanical errors in my sections that I've put out, or things that were just ill-conceived and didn't work, because that happens too. But at the end of the day, like, publishers sort of decide how much time we get to produce this stuff, and they're not giving us enough time to write it and then also work in a playtest and then actually make changes as a result of the test. There just is not time. Because I know maybe 6 or 8 weeks can sound like a lot, but you got to remember there's a couple weeks of that where you're not actually able to do anything because you're waiting for someone to get back to you about your outline or back to you about your mid-draft. And there's not much you could do while you're sitting there waiting. Some guys keep writing, but I feel like if you're going in the wrong direction already, it's better to wait and confirm you're on the right page before you start dumping another 30 hours into it or whatever. Excuse me. But yeah, so generally I don't. But on my first job, I did. My first job was very small. It was only like 8 or 9,000 words on the Corellian book. And I did have 3 of the modular encounters in the back, 3, 2, 3, something like that. The smuggling run, especially, was one where I tried to do this round counting timekeeping mechanism sort of thing that in retrospect I don't think worked at all. But it was my first job. I had never actually even played the system before writing for it because it wasn't really out. So I felt like I should at least play this thing once before I handed my final turn in. And because my section was so short and my deadline was the same as everyone else working on the book, some of whom had much longer sections, I was able to find time to run a playtest at my friendly local game store. And that was enlightening for sure. I think I did make some changes as well to playtest. I'd love to have the time to run one. But honestly, there just isn't time in the production schedule. And this isn't unique to FFG or Edge now. It's pretty industry wide. The playtesters, that's their job. And to be honest, the playtesters are made up of people, actually some literally that are in the audience right now, but they're made up of fans of the system anyway. Most of them are doing the playtest for like a free copy of the product down the road when it releases. But you all know the system better than I do, and that'll always be the case. The hardcore fans will almost always know the system better than the people who have been writing for the system. And the longer that person's been writing for the system, the less they probably know about it compared to the hardcore fans, which seems counterintuitive, but in my experience, it is absolutely factual. And a lot of that comes from the fact that a lot of times the version I work on is like, when I finish a job, it can be like a year before the book ends up on the shelf. And that's the time when everybody else gets their hands on it. And rules change from what I see when I'm developing something to what comes out in print. And, there's probably 5 different versions in my head of how conflict works. I don't even think it was named conflict when we were sort of looking at when we were doing the Force and Destiny core rulebook. So, keeping track of all that and knowing which rule is the actual rule, it always gets confused. What the writers generally focus on is understanding how the core system mechanic of the game works. And if you really understand that, at least, you could kind of head fake the rest of it. And if I'm wrong on something, it's Sam's job to fix it. And it's the playtester's job to point it out if he doesn't see it. And that's, it's a team sport in that way. My job is just to really create that initial draft of work that then everyone else sort of gets to mold and shape into the final wonderful products that you all know and love. Which isn't to say I don't know anything about the rules. I run this game at conventions a lot. So I have a lot of GM experience with it, although a lot of it's in one-shots and not a lot of it's in campaign-length stuff. But yeah, I wish I could test more. That'd be nice. But there's just not time. Long answer to the question. Sorry.
That's fair. The next question.
Okay.
This one comes from Thule. Question for Keith. Is it okay to have at least some passive voice writing in professional RPG writing? It seems like some percentage of it is unavoidable, such as in exposition writing, or to avoid the writing sounding weird or forced active voice.
This is a great question. So, and one thing I will also just throw out there is I run an online writing school called Adventure Writing Academy. It's a little side hustle that I have. And I want to say about a third of our graduating students, we haven't had that many, but like a third of them are working in the business now. So we have a pretty good success rate there. And I will tell you what I tell them, which is, in my view, like 5% or less passive voice is fine. It's not going to bother me at all. However, to get a job in the RPG industry, you need to prove and show that you can eliminate 100% of passive voice from your work. And there are certainly developers and editors out there who would be the people hiring you that will not accept work with any passive voice in it. They just won't. So while yes, I personally think passive voice has its place and its moments, they're few and far between. They do exist though. and they should be used sparingly and for a very specific reason. And it doesn't get you off the hook from being able to look at a sentence and say, is it passive or active? Change it from one to the other if need be. You need to be able to eliminate all passive voice from your work if you want to write professionally, period. You have to be able to do it. Whether you're allowed to do it once you're in, it's going to kind of depend on your editor. But generally speaking, active voice is better for professional writing. It tends to be shorter in word count as well. It tends to save you 1 to 3 words a sentence by shifting to active voice. And if you want to give your readers the most bang for their buck on the product, you don't want all those little filler, thes and bys and whatever that creep in there, the little transitional prepositions and stuff that come with passive voice. So learn to get rid of it, but it doesn't bother me. If you were working for me, I'd allow it.
For those that are listening that might not be aware of the difference, do you just want to real briefly explain what that is between active and passive?
Oh, sure. So active voice is like the boy hit the ball, right? So it's subject, verb, object. The boy hit the ball. Passive voice would be the ball was hit by the boy. So it's just moving the subject kind of after the verb instead. And you'll see the word by in there a lot. And you can see the boy hit the ball is 5 words, and the ball was hit by the boy is 7 words. And really, there are some situations where in your writing you would want to draw more attention to the object of the sentence rather than the subject. That does come up. There is sometimes a good reason for it. Usually there isn't. Usually you're wrong, but sometimes it happens. And in that case, you might want to write it in the passive voice. It might be a deliberate choice. But most all RPG editors I've ever talked to, if you can't tell the difference, they don't want to deal with you because that's a sign that you're not professional in other areas either. And you should be able to have enough control to, when you're using it on purpose, right? It's you could break the rules, but you better make sure you know them really well first.
You got to know what they are, yeah.
Yeah.
I just wanted to pop in to say we do have a question from Walrusboy who is requesting to speak. Walrus, extending the mic to you.
So before I ask this question, I want to make sure that I was listening well enough. Do we have a particular topic that we're focused on?
I don't.
Okay, cool.
As long as it's vaguely about RPGs or Star Wars, like I'm in.
So I wanted to go back to, you mentioned doing or running a lot of one-off at. I am about to run or write in for the very first one-off, and I've only ever done big one. Struggle with the pacing sometimes. So are there any tips for us? But any tips for people who are newer to one-offs, or key differences?
Walrusboy, can I just stop you real quick, man? Your audio, for me anyway, keeps cutting in and out. I'm not quite getting the question. Mace, did you hear him better? Maybe.
It did come out a little choppy. I believe the question was basically along the lines of he's interested in running one-shots and such for RPG groups, sure. And he was interested in tips about pacing and things like that.
Oh, Walrusboy, does that accurately
that
reflect your question? Yeah.
That's ballpark on it. Just things that we can keep in mind that help those one-off successful. Like, what's the difference doing
the difference between like a one-off and a campaign?
Yeah, but yeah, back to you hit it on.
Okay, sure. Yeah. So sorry, it still started cutting out again. My hearing is also terrible, guys. I was in the Navy for 4 years. I worked in an aircraft carrier a bunch, had planes taking off, landing on my head. But so my hearing is also terrible. But anyway, to get to your question, which is a wonderful one, when I'm doing a one-shot, which is most of what I GM, I generally want to go for like I think the trick is knowing how long encounters take. And if you're in a campaign or a one-shot, part of the big difference of that is knowing what system are you using. Like when I'm running FFG, I kind of know that like a social encounter is probably going to take 20 minutes. Like I could budget time. I know this combat's probably going to take 30 to 45 minutes, and this one's going to take like 2 hours or whatever. So I think budgeting your time for one-shots, especially when you're working under a clock, like we are at the conventions, right? Because they're like scheduled 4-hour blocks of games. So you kind of have a very firm sort of like deadline to finish on. So with that in mind, I could kind of determine, we're doing this a little too slow, or I'm going to have to take a few minion groups out to speed that combat up to get us back on schedule, or our bathroom break's going to have to be shorter or longer to take up the time. So a lot of it's like that, but otherwise, I think like honestly, I've had games like run away on me where people get bogged down in some encounter they're not even supposed to be in, and that ends up being like 2 hours or something like that. Like that's the nature of these games, and especially of narrative dice system, Genesis, Star Wars, whatever you want to call it. Like it lends itself to going off on these wild tangents. So I would honestly say just embrace it. Don't worry too much about the pacing, but also remember that you're telling a story. So I think you should follow some of those storytelling rules where there's maybe some sort of 3-act structure laid onto it, or some sort of idea of like how do these string of encounters tell a story. And as long as you're doing that, especially with a one-shot, right? Because I think the biggest difference between a one-shot and a campaign session is that a one-shot needs a satisfying ending, and a campaign session doesn't, because you could just delay whatever that ending might be till next week, or ever. For a campaign, you need an awesome setup and just a never-ending, interesting sort of middle that doesn't really end until way later. But a one-shot needs to fit that cool setup, some interesting twist, and a satisfying ending, like all in a 4-hour period. So the one-shots, I think, require a little more upfront planning, and definitely, if you can, I know it goes against what I just said, but if you could test a one-shot session first, do it, because one thing you'll really get out of that is a sense of how long stuff takes. Even more so than how well it's working, you'll figure out how long it takes. And that can really help you fine-tune some of it to run faster where you need it or slower where you don't. But I don't know, a lot of it for me is just from the hip. I could just sort of eyeball it, mostly because I've been writing this stuff for so long, and I run a lot of what I write at the cons as well, right? Like they'll stitch 2 modular encounters together, and that's our adventure for Gen Con or whatever. So I've just developed a sort of instinct of how things need to sort of fit together. But one really quick way to develop that instinct is to run what you got, because your belly will tell you, like, this is slow and boring right now, if it's slow and boring right now. Or it'll tell you when things are running great and everything's awesome. And, some of that comes from the table you're with, but when, like, oh man, this combat's taking forever and I still have like 9 minion groups that are about to come in for the second part of this combat. If that happens, you kind of know in your brain, we're going to cut the reinforcements, or we're going to really shrink down the initial group they run into, or, whatever the case may be. Trial and error, my friend. That's the only real advice I can give you. Get it on the table, see how it goes, develop that sort of instinct for it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Sure.
We've got 2 more requests to speak, if y'all are open to that. I'm going to hand the mic to Wolf Dog because he was trying to ask a question earlier.
Animal themes amongst the questioners today.
And I'll get to you as your GM next.
Hello.
Hello.
Well, I want to start off by extending a personal thank you to you, Mr. Kappel. I've made great use of your work in my own personal games, and when the Fantasy Flight Forum used to exist, I used to enjoy reading your personal responses to people. I never personally had an account, but I have gone through your responses endlessly to help my own games. So I want you to know that there are people out there that definitely appreciate that.
Hey, thank you so much. I appreciate you saying that. That's awesome.
No problem. I have plenty of questions, but I don't want to take too much of your time.
Sure.
So I'll ask maybe one or two, and then hand it off to other people.
Also,
We still have time for those later.
I talk for like 20 minutes on one question. So
that is phenomenal to me, and that's great. But if anybody else has them, I don't want to hog any time.
Sure,
so
sure.
I'll pitch you a few, and then hopefully we can come back to these later.
Sure.
In any case, of your published work on the Star Wars line, what are you personally the most proud of?
Ooh, that's a tough question. Proud of. You know what? I'm going to say, might surprise some people, but Gadgets and Gear is actually what I'm most proud of, because that was by far the most difficult, like, bloody my head slamming it against the desk job I've ever had in my life. So even just making it to the end of that job to me was a miracle. It was 50,000 words in a very short amount of time. And the way it was sold to me was like, these weapons are already written, they're all already statted. All you have to do is revise the words to fit this very specific format that we want, and then that's it. That's the job, and we'll pay you your normal rate for it. And I was like, that sounds awesome. And then I got it, and the format was 100 to 150 words, including special rules, and which you could see that's how it ended up in Gadgets and Gear. The problem is some of the special rules on some of these things are like 400 words long for some of these weapons and across the various Star Wars books. And somehow I had to condense that without losing any of the rule specificity and put flavor in there. And that was hard on its own. And then there's like 80 in the original draft anyway. I think there were like 90 blasters alone. And it's great for my good buddy Jason Marker, who tends to get that chapter and write the weapons. It's great for him that he can just write like 5 blasters in a book, and he could say like, this blaster is a good balance all around, whatever. The problem is I can't have like 10 of those in a row in a compilation book because that stops working. So I have to find a way to make 80 or 90 blasters in a row each sound different from each other. Each sort of had their own unique personality. So it ended up being like one of the hardest writing jobs I've ever had, and it was also very, very long on top of it. So not only was it just difficult, but it was also enormous. Having a firm word count limit every 100 to 150 words, the best comparison I could give you is like it's the difference between versus like say 50,000 of write whatever you want. Like the Disciples of Harmony book was just like, I think the brief was, Keith, you get 8,000 words in the mentor section, however many words. It's all in one spot. Go nuts. Do whatever you want. With GM advice for running mentors and stuff. And that was great. Like I wrote all that in like a very short amount of time. But so it's the difference is sort of like the difference between city driving and highway driving. The start-stop makes it all just a lot more difficult. And to have the start-stop be every 100 to 150 words, it's like every 3 sentences. It was maddening. It was by far the most difficult thing I've ever had to do. And I'm really proud of how it came out. I'm really proud of how some of those weapons that all seem like they should just be yet another blaster should be like all the lore about it. Like they do seem a little bit different. I try to give them like their own identity and stuff. A lot of new lore ended up being added into that part of the book. And the other thing in that book that I'm also equally proud of was I got to write all of the iconic weapons and equipment and stuff. So Princess Leia's diplomatic wardrobe and Lando Calrissian's cape closet were both things I had to stat. And those were assigned to me. And I sort of like scratched my head at Alexis Degema, who was the dev on that book. I was like, what am I supposed to do with these? And I want to say I spent like a day and a half on each of those because they were so weird and I just didn't know what I wanted to do. And researching silks. That was like a whole day on the internet of researching silk for Lando's cape closet. But I think those turned out good, and the fan community seemed to really enjoy them. So I'm glad she made me do them. But all credit to Alexis on that.
That's great to hear. I know they're also personal favorites of my players as well. So By all means, you did a good job there.
Yeah,
If I'm allowed to ask one more question before I depart and give the mic over to other people.
sure.
Sure. Kind of jumping off of that in terms of your content and gathering feedback, you talked a little bit earlier about just writers getting a proper response to their work. So my question is why don't other authors really interact with this community more? Is it a personal choice, or do many only treat it as a gig? How do we have a way to properly convey feedback on a product once it's available? During FFG's publishing run, the community forums never really saw many staff come with feedback outside of posted answers provided through emails.
Sure.
Maybe one or two freelancers showed up, but yourself included. But
Uh,
there really isn't proper. It doesn't seem like there really is a proper back and forth or community forum set up. So how would you like that?
I don't
to be
disagree with
established or
you.
conveyed to them?
I definitely can't speak for why other authors do or don't. That's for each of them individually to sort of make up their mind. But there are drawbacks to doing it, right? I think there was more than one occasion where I was posting on the forums and I got a very sternly worded email from Sam or someone else that like I can't be saying the stuff I'm saying. Where I was talking about future products, or people were freaking out that the sky was falling, and I was trying to be like, guys, just relax, things are going to be fine. And even that, they're like, you shouldn't comment on the future like that. And you do that one too many times, or you do it really the wrong way, and you might never work for that publisher again. So the risk associated with being involved and talking with people, like some writers don't see that as worth the reward. And I understand that, right? I could tell you that on Star Wars, at least, I don't think anyone's there because it's just a gig. Honestly, I don't think anyone's in the RPG writing business in general because it's just a gig. Because honestly, it doesn't pay enough to do it for the money. There's not that much there.
Definitely true.
So anyone who's working on a job is doing it because they love writing for games. Now that isn't to say some people might see like one job as a stepping stone to the job they really want or something like that. Like there's certainly been more jobs I've been more excited about than others. That's factual, right? Or some jobs that I took and I was excited in the beginning, but once you sort of start getting into the guts of it, it's you sort of lose your will to live. There's certainly been a few jobs, almost every job actually, where it's almost at the same time too. It's like maybe 5 days before the deadline and like the week before that, where I just hate everything and I never want to write another RPG again, and I'm burnt out entirely and I hate everything that I've written, and I just want it to all go away. Certainly, like I have that moment almost every job I work, but then the deadline gets a little too close and there's no time to have feelings because you have to get stuff done. And then the real, for me anyway, like my product comes, it looks like shit right up until like the last 48 hours, and that's when it magically turns into what it finally turns into. But yeah, so there's also like if you're successful, you probably don't have a lot of free time to interact. That's another reason a lot of guys probably don't, because almost everyone in this business, almost everyone has a day job. So this is like a side gig for them. Because again, it doesn't really pay enough to support anyone's like full bills for the most part. There's a very few, and there's some with staff jobs, but those guys are mostly editors. They're not full-time writers, so they're doing a lot of stuff that isn't writing to also be able to write a little bit as part of their job. But yeah, a lot of guys don't have time to add that on. And then there's definitely some people who have just had bad experiences, right? Where there's always a certain subset of fans who do love the thing very much, but they can take that out on some creators when something isn't the way they like in a real toxic manner, and that causes people to shy away from getting involved in those sorts of conversations. So, it's a mixed bag for why a lot of creatives don't do it. I do it because I enjoy it. My ego certainly enjoys the feedback I can sort of elicit by showing up. it's part of the reward, right? Along with the payment is people liking, the audience liking the thing you made. So there's that is a good reason to do it. I think people really enjoy the presence. Like I'm doing this right now, and I think some people are in some ways reassured or feel more connected to the game by having some amount of access to the people that are part of it and working on it. So I think it's worth doing. That's the calculus that I've made. I also just enjoy it. How would I like to see it work officially if it were up to me? I don't know. It'd be awesome if there was some like official version of what we're doing right here. If like there was an Edge Twitch stream that brought in guys like Sam or me more frequently, right? Like once a month or every 2 weeks, they had somebody, even if they're just a lowly freelancer like me, or even a copy editor or a play tester or something that sort of discuss their experience. I think that'd be great. I also don't think they want to spend money on something like that because it's not as cheap as it sounds on paper to set something up like that. You know, I'm not a marketing person. I'm not in that department, but that would be sort of their purview. The guys who make the books are not the guys who sell you the books. Those are like two completely different groups of people. And marketing is going to go where where they get the biggest returns on investment for their marketing dollar, for the most part. I would imagine, because again, I'm not a marketing guy. I don't really know how all that works. But yeah, I think it'd be great. I think for a while they were doing that Genesis Spotlight on the FFG site. And I thought that was a cool way to sort of bring individual writers to the attention of the fan community. They did have a Twitch stream set up where Sam was running a game with some of the devs. That seemed nice because there is a way for people in the crowd to sort of shout out stuff. But really, I think social media from the company is the best potential for sort of interaction. But you know, that stuff it's run by the marketing department, so their ability to interact with you about whatever game it might be isn't going to be the same as it is with a developer or a writer or someone else who did the work on the game. But most of those individuals, if you find them, we have social media too, and we're available for the most part. I think most of the writers and editors, if you send them a friend request and you're not a toxic jerk about it, most of them will take it, and they're pretty available and open to fans of their work, more so than you'd think.
Well, I definitely appreciate that answer. It seems sometimes that Asmodee could be frustratingly tight-lipped. So
yeah,
but it's like that, and I can understand it. Sometimes comes with the territory, but it also has this weird feeling of disconnect. So
sure,
even if it's not necessarily with a particular writer like yourself or the authors of the line, the Genesis Spotlight was something that I also enjoyed. Fireside chats would be nice, or
sure,
maybe a bi-monthly Q&A answer or something like that. But I understand that those things are not necessarily particularly in your control, but
not even a little, not even a little.
But
sure.
I
hear you.
I definitely still appreciate you coming in, unveiling like your own little small corner of this world.
Sure, and I definitely sympathize with how you feel. Like I was when it was D20 Star Wars, I was a giant fan myself, and can clearly remember being frustrated by certainly toward the end of the line for Saga Edition, being really frustrated with how tight-lipped everything was about news and all of that. So I remember that feeling of just sort of like, just tell me what's going on with my game, and tell me what's next, or if there's a next, or when it's coming, or whatever. So I get that, but I don't know what's going on either with the FFG Edge stuff. It's not, they don't tell me, So unless I'm working on a product, I don't know about it. And if I do work on a product, I can't talk about it until I'm told I'm allowed to talk about it. Right now, the only future product I could talk about is Twilight Imperium for Genesis, which I worked on. And I can't say much other than there's this product, Twilight Imperium for Genesis, that I worked on. But yeah, it's just it's an unfortunate part of the business, and I get it. Marketing wants to be able to announce their product with as much fanfare and on a timetable that they control, that's going to hopefully maximize sales so that they can make another one. It's a business for these companies, and they're doing things the way they believe businesses should do it. And there's certainly debate whether company X or Y is doing it right or wrong. But they also only have the budget they have to do what they can do. So all those decisions get made way far away from my little home office desk. And it's not like they even send me a memo of what the decisions are. I'm kind of in the same boat as everyone else regarding all of that. But they have announced some stuff about that Midnight, the 5th edition D&D game that I just putting out, and Twilight Imperium got announced as well. I'm hopeful we'll see more good announcements like that soon. Hopefully. Again, not that I know anything, because I don't.
Well, I definitely appreciate you commenting nonetheless. Well, I'm going to go ahead and give this back to the community.
Sure.
So I'll step out here. Thank you for your time.
Sure. My pleasure.
Excellent. Let's jump back to the text channels for a little while. There's a question here. Someone hasn't had their question answered before. From Matt D. They say, firstly, the Phalanx rules and Revan/Ulic poetry were some of my favorite parts of their respective books. As for my question, I was curious what materials you would recommend for someone who wants to start writing material for RPGs, specific books, systems, guides, sources of inspiration, etc.
Yeah, I mean, again, I would self-promote and say you should come join Adventure Writing Academy and give you a bunch of stuff and yell at you for 4 hours a day for a month or whatever, or 4 hours a day once a month for a year, and you'll be prepared that way. But otherwise, if you want to get into it, you should. You probably already have, I hope, a few different RPGs at home that you love. I would encourage you to read those and sort of do what we call reading like a writer, which is different from just reading for pleasure. It's reading in a more analytical way to understand how the writing is achieving what it is on the page, what the difference is between writing that is good and writing that is bad, and what are the sentence by sentence grammatical things going on that are making it good or bad in your opinion. I went to a 4-year college program to learn how to write, and before I went to that, me and my buddy Ryan, who I mentioned earlier, Ryan Brooks, we spent like 8 years sort of figuring it out together, critiquing each other's work and going back and forth and learning how to write stuff that sounded like the D20 stuff that we read that was official, and sort of developing our ear for what the good writing is versus the bad. So it takes time. It's not an overnight thing. The other thing I would say to you is that the knowledge of mechanics matters a lot less than you think. You probably, if you're into RPGs, you probably already know enough about how RPGs work to write for RPGs. That's not going to be the thing that gets you not hired or skipped over. The being able to write part is what's hard and what takes a long, long time to learn and a lot of practice to learn. And that's the part that will get your sample passed up or taken. I don't know. Almost any editor I've talked to, I've asked this question to a few of them, and I ask them, "Hey, you have two choices. You have somebody who is not a professional writer, but they know the mechanics really, really well, or you have somebody whose prose is immaculate and beautiful, but they've never ever worked on an RPG before and they know nothing about RPG rules. They'll take the writer every time, every single time. So I would say look at writing outside of the RPG world as well and analyze that. Take some sort of professional course. Doesn't have to be AWA, although I would recommend that. But lots of colleges have writing programs. The program I went through uses what's called the story workshop method, which is a really weird sort of hippie, hand-holdy, kumbaya way of learning how to write, which is very not who I am. So it was way outside my comfort zone, but it's really effective because it uses this sort of combination of forcing you to write in the moment as opposed to like write something at home and bring it in and trade and grade, which is how a lot of the Iowa method, which is the other big writing method, works. But this forces you to actually write live in class in the moment. And it also does a lot of interesting things to connect your ability to tell a story, like tell a joke, tell a story like audibly, with your ability to write. And it sort of links those two skills together. And doing that alone, I find, helps undo a lot of the damage that certainly the U.S. Public school system has done to a lot of kids' ability to write. The 5-paragraph essay is perhaps the most damaging thing in to the written word in America since, I don't know, sliced bread, I guess. I don't know. But it's horrible. The 5-paragraph essay has ruined what could have been generations of amazing writers, because it kind of takes all of the voice and creativity out of it. But yeah, so there's a lot you could do, man, if you want to improve, to get your skills where they need to be to get to a professional level where you can get hired. The advantage you have is that the bar for entry into the RPG world, the bar for entry is pretty low, as far as like how great your writing needs to be. So I would say, if you can speak English very clearly, then you have a very good chance, if you put a lot of work in, to finding work eventually in the industry, because it's mostly an English print sort of language world. But yeah, I would work on my skills. Once you've done that, the next thing to do, or the thing to do concurrently, even better, is follow a bunch of professionals on social media, because they tend to put on blast whenever their company or their somebody they know is running what's called an open call for writers, which is how I got into FFG. And that's where a publisher's like, oh man, our writing pool's a little thin, we need more. And they'll just be like, look, anybody who wants to try out can try out. It's like open tryouts for a sports team or something. And you can submit according to their rules what they need. It's usually like a 1-page writing sample, a cover letter, and a resume, and you can see if you get picked, right? So I would say you need to find a way to keep your ear to the ground to know when those are happening. That's the other piece of the puzzle beyond having your skills where they need to be. But you do those two things and you try, you put real effort into it. Like, it might take a while, but you'll find a spot. There's room in the industry for everyone to do a little bit of writing for at least, a couple jobs.
Excellent. I don't see any requests to speak just yet, so we'll go for another
Wasn't there
text question.
As your GM? Didn't he have a?
He was waiting, but he actually had the game to go off in GM. So.
Oh no!
Oh no!
I encouraged him to throw it into
Hopefully,
the
his
text.
question wasn't, or their question wasn't tied to the game they're about to run. Like, how do the phalanx rules work, or something like that? I'd feel terrible. Okay, well, good luck as your GM. Good luck.
I wish I'd known. Yeah, I see Marlo has added a React feature to see what questions people want the most. And we've got one here from Thule. How do you judge in professional RPG writing whether to make up and use a made-up alien name of a place or species, or to use regular English words to be clearer to the reader instead? Or perhaps to combine the two approaches? Thinking here of a FFG Star Wars Planet write-up page where you have a limited/focused word count on a single page.
Right. Well, the first rule of writing is to be clear. So clarity is going to win almost every time. But when you're dealing with something like Star Wars and you need something that clearly conveys to the audience that this is an alien place or it's this kind of place, yeah, sometimes you got to make up some funky names. So how do I decide when to do which? I guess I don't think about it that much. It's kind of instinctual, but I'm probably going to lean more toward only doing it in places where the context still tells you what it is. I don't want anyone to get confused or lost when they're reading what I'm writing. I want to be clear. That's rule 1. So so I'll kind of only use it when, like, half the time it'll be like I'll use the word when I can also say what it is right after that, right? Like the made-up word water circulation plant or something like that. So it's like, oh, I know it's a water circulation plant, and that's what they call it, or whatever the thing might be, laser, like maser gun. You don't maybe know what a maser is, but you know it's some sort of gun. So you're halfway there already. So if I'm using a made-up word, I like to be able to have some context there with it. But when it comes to names of individuals, you almost always have to make up something crazy, right, for the aliens and stuff. I can't just have like Bob the Quarren. That wouldn't really. It might fly at the table, you know, because you can't expect GMs to make up crazy stuff, but it won't fly in a book. Although now I'm sure Bob the Quarren is going to be in my next book. But so when I'm dealing with like giving an alien a name or an alien place a name that the aliens call it, I'll often look to like for ancient like dead languages, like maybe Latin or something like that. And another thing I really love to do is just look for like baby names that mean certain things in other languages. Certainly, like if a culture is sort of like shorthand for another cultural group, I might look at that cultural group and at least start there, and then it'll morph into something else based on like what I think the phonetics sound like and what I think sounds cool or fitting. So I won't like exactly copy the name from another culture, but it might be where the creative process of morphing it into something alien starts at. So I'll do that a lot. Sometimes I'll just put two noises together that I think sound good. You know, a lot of times I'll skip over names because it feels like I'll do it in revision because I don't want to lose the like forward thrust and momentum of getting like my first draft like on the page, so I could actually get to work on that and turning it into something I can actually hand in. So usually I'll just put like a pair of double ampersands or ats or whatever as a placeholder. But even if I intend to name it something perfectly, you know, normal in the English language, it's like that's something I could talk about later. It's the whatchamacallit or whatever. So yeah, a lot of times I'll skip it and save it for the end, and then I can kind of make that decision then. But I don't think about it that long. I've probably talked about it more than I've thought about it my entire career already.
Just to chime in, we do have a request to speak from Champ. If y'all are all right, I will pass the mic. Champ, I've extended the invite.
Hey there, thank you.
Oh,
So I just want to say thanks for taking my question. As a gamer and as a veteran, I'm glad to see a fellow vet in game writing, and I just wanted to know if you would talk to the audience a little bit about how do you think your experience as a veteran, even if you're in the Navy, it's okay, has helped your writing.
sure. I mean, first of all, you know, awesome. Thanks. Yeah, fellow veteran. There's a lot more of us than you'd think. So I was in the Navy. I was an intelligence specialist. I worked at Naval Space Command in Virginia for about half my time, and I worked on an aircraft carrier for about half my time, USS Theodore Roosevelt. So thank you for bringing that up. I appreciate that. What branch did you serve in?
I was in the infantry, just in the Army, good old-fashioned ground pounder.
Hey, you know, somebody's gotta.
Yep.
I can't have them shooting at me. So I'm glad
That's right.
For sure. So yeah, I think my veteran experience, my military experience, really helped with my writing. Especially for Star Wars, right? When you put like Naval Space Command together with like serving on board the very biggest thing we have in the military that moves around, which is the aircraft carrier. It's about as close as you could get to actually working on a Star Destroyer, you know. So having those experiences to draw on. I think it comes up every so often when you're writing for games that often have some sort of war or military component to them. So like directly, some of that could come up in that way. More indirectly, just some of the skills that I got when I served with as far as like dealing with stress and pressure, that comes into play every single deadline. Being able to work like 36 hours in a row without sleeping or barely even eating, like that comes from the military too. There's a lot of just character traits and things I know I can do because I was forced to do them when I served. That help me hit these deadlines and get the job done satisfactorily. And yeah, I also have like some really crazy, weird, like actual experiences that are as close as most humans are going to have to understanding what it might be like dealing with some of the more day-to-day stuff of existing in a place like the Star Wars galaxy. I know in the the Age of Rebellion location book, what's it called? Strongholds of Resistance. There's a location in there that I fought to get in there, the Independence, which is a ship, so it's not like a planet, like a traditional location. I remember we went back and forth a few times, me and Andy, who was the lead dev on that book, about like, does this really belong here? I'm like, no, I'm not trying to stay at the ship. I want to treat it like a location where people can go, almost like you would like a city or something like that, because that's kind of what it is when you get into ships that large. And I think there's even a sidebar in there about running skeleton crews and stuff like that, because people don't always think about it, but like there's shifts to these crews. It's not, there's 5,500 people on an aircraft carrier, but they're not all working all the time. But the carrier is staffed 24/7, so there's shifts. You have like double or triple the people you need to actually run the ship on board in that 5,500. But you could run the ship fine for a while with like 1,300 guys or whatever. So there were little things like that where it's stuff because you've experienced. Just like if I took like a sword fighting class my whole life and I was like a trained samurai or something, I would probably have a lot more to say about lightsaber combat and Jedi philosophy as well, probably, than just some dude like me who's read some Star Wars books about it. So yeah, I think it comes up a lot more often than people would think, and a lot of it's just the skills that I gained from that experience being applied to the work that help as well. But thanks for that question. I appreciate that. I'm always happy to talk about my military service.
No problem. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Just to add on to that, myself, just out of curiosity, you mentioned that working on an aircraft carrier is the closest thing to working on a Star Destroyer.
I'd imagine. I don't know that factually, obviously.
Yeah, but just from experience. Just curious, just out of curiosity, real quickly, how many Star Wars references get thrown around when you're in that kind of work?
When you're in that environment?
Yeah.
It's funny. There was a fella that I worked with named Spittler, Seaman Spittler. And he was like a big Star Trek guy, and I was like the big Star Wars guy. But he was a pretty serious fan. He could like speak the Klingon and stuff like that. And so we would have a little back and forth about Star Wars versus Star Trek. This is in the 90s, the late 90s when I served. But it's such a pop cultural phenomenon anyway. You can make Star Wars references. People are probably going to get them. Certainly at that time, it was like right before the prequels came out. In fact, when I was in school learning how to be an intelligence specialist, you have to get like this intense background check, security clearance, and all that stuff. And it doesn't come through right away. It takes a while for them to clear you to actually start teaching you the stuff you need to know, the classified stuff. So the first few weeks of school, the stuff you're learning is skills-based, but it's not classified materials that you're working with. So the first week or the second week, something like that, we all had to assemble a quote-unquote morning intelligence briefing to practice, getting up and doing our public speaking and explaining what the enemy's doing and predicting like weathermen, like what they're going to do tomorrow, next week, next year, whatever. So that's like a thing you have to do as an intelligence specialist all the time. So they wanted us to practice, which is good. But they're like, we can't obviously have you do it on classified materials, so just pick something. You're going to do a presentation, and we're going to just talk about presentation mechanics and stuff like that. So I go and assemble mine, and everybody else assembles theirs. We got to pick our own topics. And, as I'm watching the other people give theirs, it's dude after dude giving a Tom Clancy platform breakdown. So it'll be like, this is the submarine from Hunt for Red October, and here's how long it is, and here's what weapons it has, and here's how fast we think it could go, but we don't have the real information because that's all this stuff. And it's just dude after dude doing like real military platform stuff. And then I get up there, and I thought I had a good topic, but I was suddenly very nervous because this was 1997, 98. It was March of 1998. So the prequels were about to come out in May of 99. So they were like a year and change away. So I did my briefing on episode 1, rumors, because rumors are sort of like intelligence and stuff like that. So it's like, here's what we've heard. We don't know for sure. And I had like pictures of Liam Neeson and Rob Roy and Obi-Wan Kenobi, Ewan McGregor and Train Spotting or whatever. And I gave this presentation about episode 1 casting rumors, and the class is literally like laughing as I'm giving this. And the stakes are really high, because if you get like below an 85% once, they set you back a week. And if you do it twice, you get kicked out of the program, and you're going to tie line and knots for the next 4 years. You don't get to be an intelligence specialist. So it's very like intense. And I'm up there, my face is just getting red as I'm giving this thing, because I feel like it's only like the second week, and I already really screwed up badly. But I get through it, and I sit down, and IS-1 Knuckles is the guy who was teaching our class, and he pulls me aside after class, like, "Hey, you really like Star Wars, huh?" And I'm like, "Yes, I want IS-1 Knuckles. I'm very sorry. I could re-give the briefing if you want to. I didn't understand it had to be a military platform situation." And he just sort of said, "Oh, it's all right. It's all right. We'll talk later." And I never heard anything of it. I didn't get set back, thankfully. And it was fine. It was just not normal. But then when it was time to graduate Intel school, which I did without ever getting set back, they were handing out assignments to like where people were going to go. And where do you think they sent the Star Wars nerd? They sent me the Naval Space Command. So it all worked out okay for me.
Yeah, I feel like that. That's a pretty damn good story, and that sufficiently answers the question.
Sure.
Philbit66 asks if you're able to make a career out of writing for RPGs, or do you have a regular job to supplement? And if so, what is it?
Yeah. So for years and years, I bartended. I used to bartend 5 days a week. And then while I was going to school, obviously I had my GI Bill from serving in the military. So I was sort of able to use that to pay rent and such while I was in school. I didn't have to work. And but then when I got out, I had to start bartending again. And I started out at 5 days a week to supplement my income. And then as the writing work slowly picked up, I was able to cut back the bartending shifts until I was down to only one. Before the pandemic, I was down to one shift that I sort of didn't even, I would usually get rid of it. I would get somebody to take it for me. I'd work maybe twice a month behind the bar. But I also live a very, very, very frugal sort of lifestyle to accommodate that. If I had any dependents at all, children or something like that, this would not be sustainable. Definitely like the writing income has me living, I would say, below the poverty line if you're just taking the paid writing work. But then I also have the AWA school, which contributes some money, and other streams of income as well. But the bartending has been good to me. And the nice thing about bartending is that it was always really easy to be like, I know I work 4 shifts a week, but now my availability, like just to give you a heads up, it's going to come down to 3 days a week or 2 days a week for the foreseeable future. And they're flexible that way. And if I have a dry month or two, I could be like, hey, man, if anybody needs me to pick up shifts, I could do it to make up that extra money. So, the pay is good, and you don't need much of an education to bartend. So that was always kind of my go-to backup job. The pandemic hit, and I decided that it wasn't worth the risk to be out there bartending during the pandemic, even the places that were open. So right now, my other job is basically nothing other than AWA, which does have a couple sessions starting up soon here, I believe. But yeah, that's kind of the side job that I have to make it all work. A lot of people have like real jobs. Like Sterling Hershey, who's written out a bunch of these books, is an architect. So like that's like a real adult grown-up job that probably demands 60 hours or more a week of his time. So he does all of this writing is very much sort of on the side, is a labor of love, a joy for starting like your third class, we'll have a with special guest. So I'll bring in a friend that writes or edits or does something in the community, and they'll just take the class with you, like I do, and we'll sort of all be in it together. The classes are real. It's a lot of talking, like discussion, and it's a lot of like writing in class. It's a lot of reading aloud in class of like that shitty thing we just made you write 10 minutes ago. But you learn a lot. It's the same way I learned how to write. Our formal teacher, Maggie, went through the same college program I did. And she teaches our class because she is a professional teacher as well. She's also probably a better writer than I am. So Maggie runs the classes. The classes run for about a year. It's 10 regular classes in that format I just sort of discussed. And then we have a very special class at the end. It's a seminar, it's a lecture by Jay Little, who created the Star Wars RPG. And he talks about game design for like 3 hours and then does like an hour Q&A with the class at the end. So that's like the program in a nutshell. It's a year long. It costs $100 a month for 12 months. So it ends up being like $1,188, something like that, for the year's class. We've had, I want to say like 15 or 20 students graduate in the couple of years we've been running it. Because again, it's very small class sizes. But like a third of those now have found work in the industry, including like Ian Houlihan, who is one of the podcast hosts on The Forge. GM Hooley. He took our class and now he writes for Edge. Yeah, he worked on Twilight Imperium, I want to say. He's also done some FFG work on
Is that public
L5R.
knowledge? I don't know if that's public knowledge.
I don't know if Hooley said it, but like we're allowed to say it.
Okay, yeah.
But Chris Hunt, who has also done, he worked on the Starships and Speeders book. He was a
Also
student
very
of
good
mine.
guy.
Yeah, Chris
Chris is a really
Hunt.
good guy.
So Hooley, they're both wonderful human beings. All my students. Darren West, who did the Hadra Shard adventure for the Genesis Foundry, which is the generic of Star Wars. Same rules though, similar rules, I should say. He's done
Different
some.
game.
Nah, okay, Scott. Okay, but
It's like Star Wars and Genesis; they're the same game.
to me, they are. But Darren has done some copy editing work for FFG, and then Brett Bowen, who's another Genesis guy. He at Studio 404 with GM Phil from the Order 66 podcast. Brett is working for FASA Games now. He's doing some work with them. And Corby Kennard is another one of my students who just got some work with Modifius. So a fair number of my students have gone on to find professional work after taking the class. So I'll let that speak to the value of the class. We wanted to keep it cheap. So the price tag of $1,100 versus what I had to pay to go to a 4-year program at Columbia College Chicago. Like we feel like it's priced as cheap as we could possibly make it, so that you have a reasonable chance of making your money back working in the industry. So we've had a lot of people take it because they want to be professional writers. We've had a lot of people take it because they just want to be better GMs, better at writing their own adventures. Although, like I said earlier, most editors prefer the writer to the mechanics nerd. We don't really teach mechanics in the course. I don't want to give that sort of idea. They get discussed a little, but we're mostly there to talk about writing and writing for RPGs rather than discussing crunch and mechanic type stuff. Mostly because we would have to start getting very system specific otherwise. And Jay Little sort of covers in his lecture the sort of blanket game design theory stuff at the end. And he does it better than I possibly could.
We do have a question to speak from Wolfdog. I'll go ahead of this a little bit limited just in case other questions pop up. Dance.
This is true. I don't wish to take up too much time, but if I were not to try to shoot my shot, maybe greedy, but are mechanical creations typically assigned based on the project to be partially drafted by the author, or are they wholly left to the editorial team? Whose real job does that belong to?
I could tell you the way I understand it, because this is really like something that is a better question for someone like Sam to answer, who Sam Stewart, who sort of shepherds the whole line. Those guys, the in-house guys, When it was FFG, it was like Sam and Tim Cox and Tim Huckleberry, Alexis Dykema, Katrina Ostrander, all those folks, Tim Flanders would be doing that sort of stuff. So all the talents, it's not generally the freelancers writing talents or anything that's super, super crunchy. That tends to get written in-house for most things. But then every so often, a freelancer will have an idea or it'll be something that's sort of on the side enough that they'll just assign it to a freelancer. Sometimes they'll inexplicably give a freelancer something that should be done in-house. Like for Expanded Player's Guide for Genesis, they asked me on my own to write up the challenge rating system that's introduced for adversaries in that book. And I was like, why am I doing this? This is nuts. This is way too big a thing. Because the advantage is in-house, well, at least when it was at FFG in-house, there's like a little cubicle farm there with like 4 or 5 people that are full-time developers, and they can play testing, it's their morning or whatever. Like that's their job over there. So the ability for them to rapid prototype something and scrap it or change it and refine it is superior to anything I could do by myself alone at home. So they tend to handle the bulk of those sort of mechanical based creations. But like species freelancers come up with the species stats and stuff like that. But it goes in front of that lead developer then, and they'll change stuff as they see fit because their gut on what's right and what's wrong is a lot better honed than even the more experienced freelancers.
Right.
Or even I've done the adversaries section for more than one product, I want to say. And that's almost entirely mechanical writing. And we could do that, but that's also very easy for them to change. It takes Sam a couple seconds to look at a profile and be like, well, that brawn's way too high. It's got to come down a point and then move it down a point. It takes him infinitely longer to be like, these 3 sentences are totally messed up and I need to rewrite them or redo them. That's like infinitely more effort on its part. So that's where that comment earlier came from about most editors will take the writer over the crunchy person. But yeah, so the way that works though, like if I have an idea and I write it up, I send it to them, and then what they do with it after that, I lose track of the process at that point because they don't involve me in it. And there's reasons for that. Like, don't get me wrong, I would love to be involved and have more of a say in what happens once the work leaves my hand. But there's one of the very best reasons they don't is because my work is personal to me and to almost any writer writes stuff. So you don't need them. It'd be a bad look for me to be arguing with the playtesters in the forum about why I did something a certain way when I disagree over a change they're advocating for. Because I'm not impartial. And even if I can be impartial, not every freelance writer could be impartial. So it's sort of like a cauldron for drama and trouble. So most places, I believe, tend to separate that part of the process, and the lead developer is the only person who has to sort of be that impartial judge and know what the writer was intending, but also hear what the playtesters have to say and use their own judgment. So that all happens outside of my line of sight, though. So I can't, beyond that, I can't really say.
Understandable, of course. I was really interested about the initial creation of, do we need new mechanics, and if so, how does that process start?
Yeah,
so
like if it's just
that's mostly what I was
like just me at my desk. Yeah, if I for me, I want to say if it's me having an idea, because it's all the answers, right? Sometimes it's assigned, sometimes it's a spontaneous idea, sometimes it's something else. The more immersed I get in the rules, the longer I work in the same system, the easier it gets for me to sort of think of an iconic situation in like a movie or an example of sort of the genre we're working in, especially with Genesis more so than Star Wars, because there's already a bunch of Star Wars books and most moments from the movies have found their way into the books at this point. But when I get a Genesis job, it's a completely new genre and setting each time. So you're thinking about like what are the cliche, tropey, iconic moments of the genre and how does that translate into rules. How can I make sure that players can do that thing or have that sort of big moment at the table? So usually I'll start there, and then I'll try to come up with like an interesting mechanical way that is also real immersed in that core system mechanic, which in Star Wars and Genesis, it's assemble a pool, make a check. It's the same as the way we do everything. So how can I apply that sort of set of mechanics to this situation and just make a rule for it? That's kind of all there is to it. I tend not to think about them too much when I do them, even something a little more complicated like the phalanx rules. But every stat block, and including a PC's sort of stat block, or an adversary, or a vehicle, or whatever, a piece of equipment, they all have different levers that you can move, right? Any place where there's a number or a rule that governs a thing is something you can change to how it interacts with the rules. So the question just becomes, which levers do I move to approximate this situation or this thing? And I do that, and it happens really quick. I don't, if I'm writing an adversary for one of the books, it's rare I'll spend more than 20 or 30 minutes on the mechanical side of it.
Understandable. Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. Again.
Right. We've been going on for a little while. I think we'll close off with one last question. This was put up in the text channel, and it immediately exploded with upvote. This one comes from Circle of Noms, and it is, how big are the stories you like to tell in Star Wars? Do you prefer local stories with small stakes, or do you prefer to go big with your narratives?
Oh, man. So for me, I don't have a preference. I think the preference is just to have a good story, and I think you could have really good, fun stories either way. Certainly, I've put together one-shots like the Jedi Council game, where I created PCs that had like 2,000 earned XP to represent like Yoda and MaceWindows and stuff like that. And that was huge, and that's like as huge as it could be. An epic and sprawling Battle of the Clone Wars, where it's like the whole Jedi Council versus like Dooku and Ventress and a bunch of other people. So, I mean, that was awesome. That was fun. That was also so much work to put together, though. But then, there's smaller, more sort of, Edge of the Empire lends itself, I think, to smaller, more personal stories in general. Because, it's about like just the struggle to stay afloat. And I think a lot of that stuff is great too. I would say I don't really have a preference. A good story is going to be a good story. The scope of it doesn't necessarily, decide whether I'm going to like it or not. Because I like plenty of stuff that's very small and personal, or very big and epic. But it's Star Wars, man. So there's got to be. I think every story should have a little bit of both, right? Moments where the stakes are really personal but dire, or moments where the stakes affect millions or trillions of people.
Oh yeah, for sure, I agree. Whenever I'm running a game, I try and juggle between the two, so to have each character's own personal stakes in a grander adventure, which obviously has much bigger stakes.
Sure.
Kind of juggle between the two, keep them interested in the bigger picture, but then involve them on a personal level so that they feel invested. Absolutely,
especially when you're trying to please a table of 4 or 6, right? Because even then, no matter what your preference is at the GM, your job is sort of delivering for all 4 of those players who might have different needs for what they enjoy.
Quickly just had a flashback to my first ever Edge of the Empire game when you said, delivering a story for 4 or 6 people. My first game was 8 people, and I regret it.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, that was tough.
I'm not going to lie. Like, 6 is kind of like the upper limit for...
I agree.
For everyone at the table sort of having their moment, but even that's stressful. I feel like 4 is the butter zone. 4 is what you want.
5 is my upper limit now. Like 4 is perfect. But when I first started, it was very much a case of, I want to get everybody involved. People keep wanting to join. I don't want to say no.
Yeah, you'd do 2 games, man. That's what you got to do.
Yeah, it did end up being that after a while. I was running like 3 or 4 a week.
Jeez, man.
Yeah, I was a machine. That's hyper focus for you, and then eventually you hit burnout and you stop focusing and you go and focus on something else.
Sure. Yeah, that's when I was younger, it was just me and two of my little buddies when Stefan and Brian, when I was in junior high or whatever, when I got into the Rifts and the Robotech, and we'd play all week. We'd call each other on the phone and play one-on-one to move the story to the next part or whatever. So we were definitely like hyper focused, but we were only a group of 3, so it was always a GM and 2 players because we didn't have that many friends.
Yeah, even with 2 people, you could still tell a good story.
Sure. I wish we had a system like this back then. That would have been great.
Oh, for sure. This is definitely one of my favorites now.
To this day, I couldn't tell you how that Palladium system works, like at all. And I played it for years and years and years, and I have no idea how it works. In theory, I do a little, sort of, but complicated.
In practice, very different.
Palladium, very complicated system because it was just like a chimera of like 3rd edition, I think, and like all of these add-on rules, these house rules that were like popular with 3rd edition. It's kind of like where it started life, and then it became something else entirely. But yeah. So, was there any other final questions, or have we survived it?
Go on. Let's take one more. I'm feeling generous. I've stayed up this late already.
We just got a speaking request from Scott. If we want to pass the mic, I'll do that.
All right, yeah, sure. Let's go for it. We've had a few text questions. Let's go for a voice one. Hello, Scott.
Welcome, Scott.
Hi, Keith. Thanks for taking my question here. I just have a very brief question on the Force and Destiny core rulebook.
Sure.
There's a page in there. I'm a big fan of the expanded universe, and there's actually a page in there in regards to the events of the Clone Wars. And
do you have the book open? You could tell me the page. I could just look at it.
I think it's page 343. I don't have it in front of me, but there's some discussion in regards to how Comp Nor and the Emperor have kind of taken over the HoloNet, and the events of the Clone Wars are getting messed up. They're going out to the public, but they're not exactly as they happened. Was there any intent on the part of yourself or any of the other writers to kind of reconcile some of the continuity errors in the Clone Wars?
Man, well, I mean, I'm a big EU fan as well. I'll say that. If we had video, you could see behind me. There's a complete collection of the novels and the old West End game books and D20 books and all that sort of stuff. So I've had all that stuff. I've read all that stuff. I know all that stuff pretty well. So I love bringing in stuff like the Sector Rangers, which I actually mentioned in the section you're talking about, Comp Nor, of course, and Bureau of Ships and Services. So there's a lot of I sort of love the sort of bureaucracy of the Republic / Empire and how one sort of becomes the other. And so you could see a lot of it in the 2 Clone Wars books where I talk about the factions. And I sort of bring a lot of this sort of discussion in there as well, where I'm sort of calling back a lot of obscure EU stuff from the old West End Games books about how the Empire functioned and sort of bringing it, sort of retconning it a little bit and showing how it was there in a different form for the Galactic Republic. I love stuff like that. I love doing that. So that's definitely me doing that. That's not them telling me to do it. That's just one of the one of the perks of doing this job is I sort of get to bring, when I can, when it's appropriate, I could sort of find stuff I really love from the EU or just other parts of Star Wars and reference it. So like the Corporate Sector Authority gets referenced in here as well. So, all these trade route names and stuff like that. So yeah, I wouldn't say it's a concerted effort, but it's not like they were fighting me on any of it. So I got the impression it was either expected or they're okay with it. But yeah, man, I love the EU too, and where it works, where reference is natural and is adding something, like I love to throw those in there when possible. Even we mentioned earlier the Revan and Ulan Keldrum was sort of poetry and mythologies as a sort of explanation to give space for those stories to still live in canon for GMs who want to. Yeah, I love doing stuff like that.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Right. Well, we've certainly had some very good insight today. Lots of interesting conversation. Lots of very good and creative questions.
Yeah, no, I had a wonderful time. I appreciate everyone's question and just showing up to listen and all that. This was a blast for me. I love it. And if we didn't get to your question or you had one or something, you can always find me. I'm lurking around somewhere. Feel free to send me a private on here. That's fine. I'll get to it when I do.
Yeah, I was going to mention, like, it's not like this is going to be a one-time and done thing, and we'll never hear from you again. You're fairly active within this Discord. I've seen you usually when I get up in the morning, and I check through the channels to make sure no one's posted really horrible things while I'm asleep.
Sure.
I see that you've been answering a lot of questions and providing a lot of helpful input.
Yeah, when it's 2 a.m. and I'm supposed to be working and I don't want to because writing is hard, I will often distract myself by visiting a Discord and saying hello. So I don't know if I'd describe myself as active, but accessible for sure.
Yeah.
Definitely accessible. So if you tag me, I will see it and find it, probably. Might not have the answer you want, but I'll see it.
Yeah, there were a few questions in the text channel that we didn't get around to, but they'll be there pretty much forever. If ever you feel like getting around to answering them, or if they're absolutely burning questions that you have to have answers for, as Keith says, just tag him.
Yeah. Tag me.
I also did pin in that channel. I posted a link to the Adventure Writing Academy and pinned it up just so people can have a look. Because we talked about it enough times. I think it was.
Yeah, it came up.
Yeah, it came up.
And if I'm going to get a chance to promote, I should also say I have 2 big products on the Genesis Foundry. I know it's not Star Wars, but the systems are similar enough to the point of being nearly identical that you might find some stuff in there you like. Ready Fight is the name of my flagship product, and it's an unarmed combat source book for it's for Genesis specifically, but you might find some stuff in there you like. And I also have a Factions product that I think is a little bit of an easier concept to bolt onto Star Wars. So my Factions 1 book you might want to check out as well, and that's only $3. And then I have a Vehicles book coming out hopefully in the next few months. We'll see though. That has a tendency to get delayed. But yeah. And then
Nice.
look for Twilight Imperium eventually for Genesis as well from me.
One day that shall be released.
Well, we'll see.
That's all we can say on.
Yeah, I have no idea when exactly it'll come out. I know I'm done working on it. I can say that.
Well, excellent. Thanks a lot for coming along to this. As I said, it's been very interesting hearing your thoughts and answering these questions. And thank you all who attended for bringing these questions to us and listening in.
Yeah, it was a great time.
This has been wonderful.
Yeah, I had a wonderful time. Thanks for setting everything up and doing all the hard work. I just had to show up and yap. That's easy.
You're more than welcome.
All right. Well, I guess we'll call it then, yeah?
Yep, this is the official end.
Oh, wonderful. All right. Bye, everybody. Thanks for coming.